For 134 years, the name Lizzie Borden has lived between fact and folklore. The stories of poison, missing testimony, and suspicious timelines have all shaped public belief. But what actually happened? And was it simply rumor? Today, we examine the evidence and the truth behind one of history's most debated cases.
Lizzie Borden, we're back. My favorite homegirl. What's going on, Rich?
Good morning, Seth. Here we are on another Saturday morning. A little bit of white stuff coming back. I've had enough of winter.
So have I.
This has been not much fun. It's been cold too. So, but here we are. We're going to do another episode on Lizzie Borden. We're not going to talk about Lizzie's life before or after the tragedy. We're going to talk about the facts and the rumors.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of facts out there, and there's a lot of rumors out there. And over the 134 years since, they have sort of been blended into this story of Lizzie Borden, which is not necessarily the truth. So let's get the facts, as Jack Webb would say. I want the facts, nothing but the facts. Probably not many of our watchers remember Jack Webb on Dragnet, but it was big when I was young.
So today we're going to break down the evidence around the case. We're going to talk about what was used against her, what might be myths, and everything in between. So when we look at the case, there's really one major point that I usually get hung up on. And it's kind of up for like controversy, and that's the prussic acid.
Right.
Do you want to start with prussic acid?
Sure.
All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
Did not happen.
Well, let's hear about it.
Well, I have here an original copy. That's better. Of the Fall River Daily Globe. And this came out on the 5th, the day after the murders. And right here in the right-hand column, it says, "The butchery of yesterday as yet a mystery." That's the first statement. Second statement, what did Lizzie want of poison? We've all heard the story about the prussic acid. Some lady came in to see our Smith pharmacy, which is not too far away from the Borden home. On Wednesday, the day before the tragedy, that would have been the 3rd of August, 1892, and attempted to buy 10 cents worth of prussic acid. Prussic acid is a poison, and the pharmacist clerk, not pharmacist, but the clerk, stated, "Do you have a prescription?" And the answer was given no. And therefore he refused to sell the prussic acid. The person who was attempting to buy the prussic acid said that they wanted it for a moth or bug infestation that was on a mink stole. So he did not know who this person was. The name of the pharmacist clerk was Eli Bentz, and he stated he didn't know who the person was. And his brother formerly was a Fall River PD police officer. And when the crime occurred on the 4th, he talked to his brother and said, there was a woman in here yesterday and tried to buy prussic acid. That's a poison, and I didn't sell. And he said, "Did you know who it was?" And Eli Bent said, "No. Could you identify her?" "Well, maybe." So on the evening of the 4th, after the deaths, and Eli Bentz told his brother this after he had heard about the double murder on 2nd Street at the Borden home. And so he was brought by 2 police officers over to the Borden home. Now, this is on the evening of the 4th of August. No daylight savings time, so it's dark at 8 o'clock. And there's 3 women sitting across from the door where he comes in at the back door at the kitchen. and the kerosene lamp, because there was no electricity in that part of Fall River at that time. And they said, is that her, the one in the middle? Well, first of all, that's completely biasing somebody.
Yeah, right.
And he said, I don't know, could you have her speak? And so she did speak. And he said, well, that might be her. So this was on the day of the murders, evening, August 4th, 1892. Fast forward a week later, inquiry. Inquiry is whether or not a crime had been committed. This is the only time that Lizzie Borden testified, was at the inquiry.
Right.
Eli Bentz, the pharmacist mate, came and they said somebody tried to buy prussic acid the day before the murders. Do you know who it was? And he then said, I knew that it was Andrew Borden's daughter. And as the hearings went on, it went to the preliminary hearing, and he seemed to know her more. And it went to the grand jury, and we don't know what was said at the grand jury. But by the time it got to court, and he was going to be a witness for the prosecution, he had known Lizzie Borden for 10 years.
Yeah.
She had visited another pharmacy that he formerly worked at.
So the story just evolved, it became more elaborate.
Well, it took on a life of its own. The owner of C.R. Smith Pharmacy loved the fact that his employee was in court. It was in the newspaper every day where he worked.
Oh, yeah.
And that was like free advertising.
Absolutely.
Next thing you know, other pharmacies in Fall River were saying, I think she may have come here to buy prussic acid as well. Eli Bentz was put on the stand at Lizzie's trial in June of the following year, 1893, and stated his name, stated his address, stated what he did, and then Lizzie's attorney, a guy by the name of George Robinson, and we'll be talking about him today, he said he objected. And his reason for objecting was there was no poison involved in the death of these two people. That was confirmed by an autopsy when they removed the stomachs and sent them into Harvard University, and there was no poison indicated. And here you are bringing this up in court when somebody's on trial for murder, yet they did not murder anybody by poison. So the court said that you're absolutely right, and they wouldn't allow Eli Bentz to testify.
Wow.
So after going through all of that, and this story has taken on a life of its own. First of all, Lizzie Borden was sick on the 3rd of August. We know that because of a testimony of Dr. Bowen, his wife, Phoebe Bowen. She had talked to Abby Bowen, that would be the deceased Abby Bowen, Lizzie's stepmother, on the afternoon of the 3rd, and she said, everybody in the house has been sick. We've been throwing, we've been vomiting. I don't know whether we've got bad food or poisoning or even Lizzie's been sick. And she told this, and Mrs. Bowen, the doctor's wife, testified to this in court, that Mrs. Borden had told her that Lizzie's been sick. In fact, that evening, Dr. Bowen's wife saw Lizzie going down the street and said to her husband, Dr. Bowen, gee, Lizzie must be feeling better. She's going out for a walk. And this was after 6 o'clock on the 3rd of August, 1892.
So she didn't necessarily leave the house much during these times that she was ill.
She didn't leave the house on the 3rd until 6 o'clock in the evening, according to witness Dr. Bowen's wife.
And when did Eli Bentz say that she entered the store?
At 10 a.m. in the morning on the 3rd.
So there's accounts saying that Lizzie hadn't even left the house.
Right.
Right, okay.
So that kind of throws out that whole story, but here we are,
Yeah,
2026 is still talking about it.
gotcha. Okay. And Lizzie didn't ever testify, so she never
The only
brought
time
forth
Lizzie
any-
testified was in the inquiry, and she was not asked about purchasing poison. Eli Bentz testified at the inquiry and said that Andrew Borden's daughter attempted to buy prussic acid, 10 cents worth, by the way, and told him why she wanted it. And but the day before, he didn't know who the woman was.
So how did this become such honestly almost became a fact in the case? It's something that we still talk about.
That came early in the case. And we talked about this, that on the afternoon of the 4th, after it was confirmed that both Mr. and Mrs. Borden had been dispatched in a similar manner, they decided to do a preliminary autopsy at the house. So they brought Mrs. Bowen downstairs on a board, on a body board, and they set one up in the parlor, one in the sitting room, each victim. There were 8 doctors there, including the mayor of Fall River, who liked to get involved in things, and he was a doctor.
Oh, it was.
So he was in on it. So you have four doctors working on Mrs. Bowen, 4 doctors working on Mr. Bowen, and basically it was just an examination. It wasn't a full autopsy. Full autopsy didn't occur for about 10 days later. So this was the day of the murders. One of the doctors said, is there any possibility that these people could have been poisoned and then struck with some type of blunt object to make it look like they had been murdered in that way, that they were actually dead when they were struck? And the consensus was that's a possibility. So what they did was they removed the stomachs of both Mr. and Mrs. Borden, sealed them off top and bottom, put them in a glass jar, sealed the glass jars with wax, and sent them to Harvard by courier. Someone took them by train into Boston, so they were in Boston the next day. And they were able to test the contents of the stomach. We think that forensics didn't really exist back in 1892, but it did. And they examined the contents, found no poisons, but they were able to determine by examining the contents which of the victims died first because of the digestion rate. They knew that both of them had had breakfast at the same time, approximately 7:15 a.m., and that Mr. Bowen's digestion of what they had in the breakfast, which was reported to be Johnny cakes, coffee, and perhaps some fruit, and that his contents were more digested than Mrs. Borden. Conclusion, Mr. Borden died after Mrs. Borden. Estimated time, approximately an hour and a half difference between the deaths.
Wow.
So when the body was discovered by Lizzie, which was just after 11, and he had come home at 10:30, so we have to make an assumption that he was murdered somewhere between 10:30 and 11, just after 11 o'clock, so that half-hour window. And given that amount of time, then we can go back an hour and a half with Mrs. Borden and determine that she died probably around 9:15, maybe 9:30, somewhere in that window, because of the digestion difference. So that's the story about the prussic acid, and that uh, every time we have a seminar, and this question has come in a lot when we do a Lizzie podcast, somebody asks about the poison. The poison was a fabrication of newspapers got right onto it. This is the newspaper on the day after, and they're already asking about the poison because they knew that Eli Benz had told his brother, a former policeman in Fall River, that somebody tried to buy prussic acid, and they jumped to the conclusion that it was Lizzie Borden.
What are some of the other pieces of evidence that was brought against Lizzie?
Well, there's all kinds of things. Number one, about her being in the loft of the garage barn. The Bordens no longer had a horse. At one time, they had a horse and buggy, but as time went on, we're into the late 1800s. There was really no need to own your own horse. It was easy. If you needed a horse and a buggy, you could just walk almost 2 houses down the street, and there was a stable behind some house. You could it was just as easy to rent. Then you didn't have the upkeep of the horse and mucking out the stall and all of that. Plus, you could get around Fall River in 1892 by horse-drawn trolley, which was really convenient and ran on a schedule, and many people used that. It later became electrified, as it did in many cities and towns, and there was no need for having a personal horse for the Bordens, and they had not had a horse of their own for at least 3 or 4 years. But they still had the barn, and the barn had a loft. And Lizzie stated that she was in the loft looking for lead sinkers because she was supposed to go fishing the following week. And the police thought that was rather an implausible, given the terrific heat of the day, because they said it was one of the hottest days of the summer. In reality, it wasn't. How do you know? How do we know what the temperature was, what the weather was in Fall River on the 4th? Look in the newspapers. It was in every newspaper.
What's it say?
Well, it said early morning, low 60s, high temperature for the day, mid to upper 70s, 76.
It's like perfect weather.
And so at 11 o'clock in the morning, where Lizzie said she was in the loft of the barn, it probably wasn't so hot you couldn't be up there. But can we prove she was there? Well, she claims she came downstairs and went and gathered some pears, and then was headed into the house with the pears.
So came downstairs from the loft.
For the loft,
gathered
left
pears.
the barn, gathered some pears, and went into the house. At approximately 11:05, an ice cream vendor by the name of Lubinsky happened to be going by with his horse-drawn wagon, and he often sold ice cream to the Bordens. So he saw a woman coming out and headed for the side door, and at first he thought it was Bridget Sullivan, because that's who he usually dealt with when he sold them ice cream. But he saw this woman, and he testified to this in court, that he saw a woman. He did not know who it was, but he did know that it was not Bridget Sullivan. So that leaves one possible person.
Yeah.
It had to be Lizzie, because the only people who were in the house at that time were 2 deceased at 11 o'clock, just after 11 o'clock, 2 deceased, father and mother, father on the first floor, stepmother on the second floor, Bridget Sullivan, and Lizzie. And so Hyman Lubinsky says that it wasn't Bridget Sullivan, so we have to conclude that it was Lizzie. as she said, she entered the house from the barn right after 11 o'clock. Now, how do you fix 11 o'clock, or how did Lizzie fix 11 o'clock? The whole town fixed their time by the City Hall chimes, similar to your chimes here.
They're kind of notorious with the show. I love my grandfather clock.
So the chimes went off on the hour, and they were very distinctive. And the ice cream vendor who worked for Wilkinson's Dairy and Ice Cream said he heard the chimes, and then he was going past the Borden house. So it had to be just after 11 o'clock. So that fixed the time that Lizzie said she was coming back in the house, and we have a witness that testified in court that that was the time that she went back in the house.
I'm just curious. Did it go off on the quarter or on every hour?
On the hour.
So it wasn't a quarterly chime.
No,
okay.
It was an hour.
Interesting. All right. So we have two pieces of evidence which are not really sticking.
Right.
What else is brought against Lizzie?
Well, there were many, many theories that people had on why she acted the way she did. And this was suspicious. Number one, and we talked about this, and we're not going to talk too much about the alibi of Uncle John. We can do that a little bit towards the end. But Lizzie is the one who discovered her father's slain body.
Sure.
Came into the house, had the pears, dropped them in the sink. Her father had got home from his morning ritual, which was to walk around looking at some of his business interests. He had a building that was being constructed in downtown Fall River. He checked on that. He went to a couple of his banks that he was involved with, and then he came home. He came home at around 10:30. This was witnessed by the next door neighbor, Dr. Kelly's wife. She was going for a dental appointment and saw Mr. Borden coming home and going to his front door. She estimated the time to be between 10:30 and 10:35, and he entered the front door. So that kind of fixes the time from an independent witness what time he got home.
Sure.
Lizzie says he brought home the mail because he picked it up at the post office, and then said he was a little bit tired. It had been a rough week for the Bordens. Everybody had that stomach bug that was going around, so much so that Mrs. Borden went over and talked to Dr. Bowen and said, I don't know, maybe somebody's trying to poison us. And he attributed it to poor food, not well refrigerated, because they didn't have refrigerators because there wasn't electricity. So everybody had an ice box, which meant that the Iceman came, and the Iceman had come that morning of the 4th. And so that tells you what the temperature inside the ice box, the cabinet was, had to be 32 degrees, right? Because they put ice in there. Exactly. And ice melts at 32 degrees. Drops down into a pan below, which you either drop down the sink or, and...
Was it one big block of ice or was it cubes?
There were blocks of ice.
Blocks of ice, okay.
Blocks of ice. Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm showing my age. I can remember when there was an Iceman in my town, in Rockland.
Wow.
And in fact,
I have never known that. That's so cool. Like, you see all like the movies and stuff like that. You got like the Milkman, the Iceman. It's like I've never known that because I've always known refrigeration.
Well, a classmate of mine from Rockland, who I graduated with, his father was the Iceman.
Wow. And
as he came down the street, he knew where his customers were. And if they put a sign, there was a little sign that he supplied. They put that in the window. It said ice. That meant that they needed ice. And he would take out these ice tongs, carve off a piece with a nice pick, and we would be around and hope that he was going to shave off a little bit and give us a hunk of ice in the summertime. He had this rubber thing on his shoulder, and he would put this over his shoulder so his shoulder would not get wet, his shirt would not get wet, because he had this rubber pad on it. Bring it into the house and put it into the ice box. He didn't pick up anything because everything melted. And so this is in the 1950s. Some people still had an Iceman.
Wow.
And the ice came from local ponds.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
They would harvest the ice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Keep it in a ice house. And there's still some remnants of, there's a remnants of an ice house over in Abington on Island Grove, because they harvested ice at Island Grove, and it's still out in the back of somebody's yard. It was often made of very, very thick cork material as an insulator, and they would cover it up with sawdust to keep it
seal
insulated,
yeah.
and it would stay all summer inside there.
Wow.
And that way they could keep delivering ice to those who needed it throughout the summer.
So what are some of the other pieces of evidence that are, that are I guess are pointing towards Lizzie, or maybe just in theory are pointing towards Lizzie?
Well, people talk about the 10 pages of testimony of Bridget Sullivan that were missing from the inquiry. Now, the inquiry was held several days after the murder, and in Massachusetts, an inquiry is held to find out, did a crime occur? You just can't assume that a crime occurred, even though you know the crime occurred. An inquiry tells you whether the proceedings should go further. And here we have two deceased members of the family, a husband and wife, and they obviously didn't die of natural causes. And we can show that with the skull pictures that we have today.
Do you want to talk a little bit about these pictures?
Yeah, you can. We can take those and
Here, I'll hold them up if you want to tell the story.
Sure. And this is an actual picture of one of the two victims, and it'll tell you the name on the back of that. That looks like Mr. Borden.
So this was Father Borden.
That one's Father Borden, and this one is Mrs. Borden.
Yep, mother.
And they are very, very similar, except that they're on opposite sides of the skull. And you may say, well, why do you have pictures of the skulls? Well, at the burial, the bodies were actually not buried. The bodies were transferred to what was called like a holding grave for an autopsy, and for the official state autopsy, which was done 10 days later. At that time, the heads were removed, and both of them were boiled to boil off the flesh and remaining remnants of the brain and things like that. Then the two bodies, headless, were interned and buried at Oak Grove Cemetery. The official autopsy was done in what they call the ladies' comfort station, which would have been the woman's toilet at the Oak Grove Cemetery. And that was done a week later by the medical examiner, and they retained the skulls and presented them as evidence in the trial to show that an axe would fit inside those. Well, almost any blunt instrument would fit into those gaping wounds on the sides of Mr. and Mrs. Borden.
These pictures are unique that I was just holding.
Yes, those pictures came to me, and I think I told you a while back that I had purchased a book that had been offered for sale, and when I got that, there was a little note from the person that I bought the book off of, and he said, these belong to my dad. These pictures were, my granddad, and these pictures were purchased around the 10th anniversary of the Borden of the Borden tragedy. There's also a picture of the Borden, Lizzie and Emma's house that they bought up on French Street.
That one?
Yes. And that's not where the crime occurred. That's where they moved.
It's Maplecroft?
That's Maplecroft. And that was probably...
it's a big property.
It is, and it's still there. It's
Wow.
it's in the fancy section of Fall River. And so getting back to those two skulls were presented as evidence at the trial. At the inquiry, there were 10 pages missing of Bridget's testimony. And people have made a lot about that. What could have happened to that? And basically what happened was either the court stenographer was either late or on a break, and it was not taken down. It was taken down by the newspaper people who were there. Now remember, there was newspaper people there, but Lizzie was not allowed to have an attorney there.
Wow.
Because the judge at that time said that I don't want lawyers here. I don't want you to have your lawyer here, and I'm the judge, and only the district attorney is going to be here, and he'll ask the questions. And for some reason or another, the transcript shows 10 missing pages of Bridget Sullivan's testimony. A lot of people read into that. That's really important information, that somebody must have absconded with that. The explanation is they don't think they were taken, and the newspaper reporters, they kind of pieced it together and printed it in the paper. And that's why it's not official. That's why it's not in the official record. Now, an inquiry, as I said, was to determine that a crime has been committed, and they did prove that a crime had been committed, and Lizzie was arrested soon after. Initially held at the Fall River Jail. Remember, the Fall River Police Department had 125 members. 123 of them were male officers, and 2 of them were female matrons. They did not have female police officers. They had female matrons, and the matrons were hired for any female crimes, and they didn't have any accommodations for her there, so she was put in a room under a house arrest type situation until she could be transferred to the county facility in Taunton, Massachusetts, which at that time was called the Hodges Street Jail, also known as the Bristol County House of Correction and Jail, and that was in the same building. Remember, House of Correction is where people who are sentenced are serving their sentence, and a jail might be in the same building, but the accommodations are that people are held in jail are not held in the same part of the facility of those who are held in the House of Correction, because people in jail are people who are waiting trial, determined to be a flight risk. And Lizzie was determined to be a flight risk because of her wealth, because of her money. And so she was incarcerated there in Taunton at the Hodges Street Jail until the trial. She appeared at the preliminary hearing but did not testify. She appeared at the arraignment but did not testify. And then at the court proceedings in June of 1893, of course, she appeared, but she did not testify. The only time she testified was at the inquiry. She wanted to have her attorney, and as I said, that was not allowed. They changed that law in Massachusetts, and we've talked about this before. That never changed until 1969. And there was another infamous case, which we covered on a podcast, about Chattapaqua Island.
Yeah.
And Senator Ted Kennedy had the misfortune of driving off the Dyke Bridge. Car went into the water. There was a dead body in the water. Somebody had drowned. Did a crime occur? Went to an inquiry. Did a crime occur? The judge said, well, there was a dead body in the back of the car, and you didn't report it for many hours afterwards. I determined that there probably was a crime committed. And Ted Kennedy says, I want my lawyer. He was a lawyer, and he wanted his law team. And the judge said, no, wait, this is Massachusetts. The judge has jurisdiction over an inquiry. So the Kennedy team appealed it to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And the Massachusetts Supreme Court said, yes, indeed, you can have an attorney. Lizzie was not offered that particular option. So in 1969, the law changed. So if you are asked to come to an inquiry and asked to testify, you can have an attorney with you. Of course you can.
How would the case have changed if she was allowed to have an attorney present?
Well, in this case, a lot, because they said that in her testimony that she gave inconsistent answers. She seemed to be confused. She seemed to be mixed up. She didn't get her facts straight. Nobody took into consideration that Dr. Bowen, the family physician for the Borden family, who lived right across the street from them, had prescribed first a mild sedative, then a little bit of a stronger sedative to Lizzie because of what she had gone through with the death of her stepmother and her father. So the medicine of choice at that time was morphine. And back then, morphine was measured in grains. We don't measure medicines in grains anymore. We now measure them in grams or milligrams or something like that. But the dosage that he gave was 8 grains, which in today's nomenclature would be about the size of 1.5 aspirins. He upped that dosage on Friday, the day before the funeral, the day after the murders, the day before the funeral, to 16 grains, which would have been about the size of 3 regular size aspirins, not the small child 81 milligram, the regular size aspirin. So she was taking 3 of those at a time, and the instructions said use as needed. So she took them over the weekend, and then when the inquiry came, she was still taking them. It's a wonder she was able to testify at all. And I think if there was an attorney present, he probably wouldn't have allowed her to testify under those circumstances, where she was under a doctor's care and was being prescribed morphine in high dosage and was taking it.
What are some of the side effects of high-dose morphine?
Confusion, tiredness, fatigue. Got to remember, they were trying to calm her nerves. And in that dosage, it can make you almost comatose.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Like you're falling asleep.
Okay.
So I think when she got her attorney, was able to talk to her attorney, he said, "That's it. You're not going to testify any longer." So the preliminary hearing, which was held at the end of August, she did not testify. And in the arraignment, there was no testifying in the arraignment. Arraignment just reads what you've been charged with, so notification of charge before the trial. And during the trial, she did not testify. She was not asked to testify by her team. Now, speaking about a team, and when we often do this, we kind of compare things to other cases.
Sure.
And we could compare it a little bit to the Karen Reed case, where Karen Reed early on suspected that she was going to be charged. It just looked like the way things were going. They required her to get a blood test. And to her, that meant that they were going to try to possibly indict her under an alcohol, operating under the influence, or vehicular homicide when under the influence of alcohol. And so she went and got an attorney right off the bat. Here in Massachusetts, attorney by the name of Yannetti. And very, very good attorney and specialized in those crimes. And she was criticized for that. Well, she mustn't be admitting that she was drinking because she got this hotshot lawyer that specializes in alcohol cases. So Lizzie, on the other hand, got her father's attorney, a guy by the name of Jenkins. And in today's day, he would have probably recused himself and not been her attorney because he knew too much about the father's business, because he was the legal attorney for Andrew Borden and knew all of Andrew Borden's finances and things like that. That's kind of conflict of interest to represent a daughter.
Sure.
And who formerly represented the deceased. And you wouldn't do that, necessarily see that today. But back then, that was acceptable to do. And he knew right off the bat that he needed help. That he didn't like the way things were going. Didn't like the way things were shaping up. Jumping to conclusions. There's at least 3 possible suspects in this crime. The 3 people who possibly could have been at the house. We know, first of all, there were 5 people there the night before and the morning. Now 2 of them are deceased. We can safely conclude by examination of the body that it wasn't murder-suicide. So now we're down to 3 people. And the 3 people who were in and out of that house on that day were whom? Lizzie Borden, Bridget Sullivan, and John Moss. John Moss, uncle of Lizzie Borden, uncle of Emma Borden, brother of the first Mrs. Borden, Sarah Borden. He and Mr. Borden had a business arrangement involving horses and cattle that were shipped from Iowa and shipped to Mr. Borden's farm in Swansea. This is just one of Mr. Borden's jobs. And Mr. Morse was there and stayed overnight, had breakfast in the morning with the Bordens, and he should have been a suspect because he was in the house, had access to the house, knew the house, and he said he was away from the house when the murders occurred, and got back and wandered onto the property at about 20 minutes of noon. Didn't notice that there were police there. Didn't know what was going on in the house. He wound up in the backyard, had a pear, and finally went to the back door and said, "Hey, what's happening? What's going on?"
It seems just kind of weird to me. It seems
it is weird. It's just mind-blowing that, and they said, "Where were you? Where were you?" And he said, "Oh, I was visiting a relative up in Wybossett Street." And we can check that out. And in every copy of my book, I put this insert in. And on one side of the page is the story of the tragedy written on the 5th of August. It's Fall River Herald, and it's an article written about John Moss's alibi. On the flip side of that piece of paper is a testimony by police officer William Medley about John Moss's alibi.
You have some questions there.
I do.
What do you, those are just common questions that are...
Well, these are some common questions, and I'm going to show this.
That's so cool.
This is a large book, and it is... it was printed in 1992, the 100th anniversary of the Borden, and it is the New Bedford Evening Standard, and this is just full of print copy of the daily events surrounding the Borden case. And at the very beginning, the Times, Standard Times writer, a guy by the name of John Ackerman, came up with these questions. And these are the same questions that we get on comments. What happened to the 10 pages of missing transcript? Well, basically, there's nothing suspicious there. They just didn't get taken.
Yeah.
Stenographer didn't take them. Newspapers filled in the gaps. But now it looks like people removed them. They were never removed because they were never there.
It seems to be tampered with.
Right. The poison. Well, the question was, what was Lizzie's real reason for buying poison? Well, we know that Lizzie didn't buy poison. That's a fabrication of the press and a story by Eli Bentz, who was not allowed to testify. People believe that, well, he testified in court that he did not. It was not allowed. He was not allowed to testify in her trial. That didn't even come up. Another question people ask, if Lizzie was innocent, how could she continue to live in the house after the killings? Wasn't she afraid that the unknown killer might come back and strike again? Well, after she was released from jail, after she was released from court, she was brought from jail, from the Hodges Street Jail in Taunton, to the courthouse, and the trial was in New Bedford. Bigger courthouse, and that's where she was found not guilty. From there, she traveled back to Fall River, back to 92 2nd Street with her sister Emma. And Emma had been staying in the house for the past year. And they decided soon after that they were going to move, and they did. They moved to Maplecroft, and there's a picture in that set of pictures that I gave you. There's also on the back page of this particular publication down the bottom is a picture of Maplecroft, a substantial house, beautiful home. And Lizzie had it lettered on the front steps, Maplecroft. It's still there today.
Where does the term Maplecroft come from?
That was a name that she just picked for that particular property.
Really?
She liked the name Maplecroft. So, getting to where we were just a moment ago, they only were back at 92 2nd Street for a few months before they moved up to Maplecroft. And Lizzie and Emma lived in Maplecroft from roughly 1893 until Emma moved out in 1905.
Oh, wow. So they lived together for a while.
Yeah, they lived together for about 8 years. And what is the reason for Emma leaving? We don't know. But it was suspicious. Maybe she finally came to the conclusion that Lizzie was responsible for the death.
Yeah.
Lizzie balanced the books, and Emma got her share. She finally wound up in Newmarket, New Hampshire. She was still receiving funds from the estate because many of those businesses continued.
Yeah.
Lizzie managed the funds for the rental properties, which were numerous. In fact, they rented 92 2nd Street where the murders occurred.
Wow.
For a few years until they disposed of that property.
Wow.
Lizzie continued to buy property, especially around the Maplecroft area. When a house had become available near her, she bought it. And so she had a sizable portfolio because Mr. Borden, when he passed away, had approximately $500,000 worth of property, and that's what his estate was. And that would be around $15 to $18 million in today's dollars.
Wow.
So we were talking about the attorneys, and Lizzie's attorney, a guy by the name of Jenkins, said right off, you know what, this thing is bigger than me, and I'm going to, let me get my notes here, and I'm going to need help. I'm going to need other attorneys. And so he decided he was going to hire somebody, or that Lizzie was going to hire somebody. And so he hired a guy by the name of George Robinson. Now, we've never heard of George Robinson. However, George Robinson was a big, heavy hitter in the world of attorneys. His former governor of Massachusetts. There were 3 judges trying the Lizzie case. 2 of them had been appointed by Governor Robinson. So he was a good guy to have in this fight. And Attorney Yannetti for Karen Reed did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
He knew that this was going to be a difficult case. He looked like, to him and others, that people were conspiring to make it look like Karen Reed was responsible for John O'Keefe's death by motor vehicle. And in this case, her attorney, Jenkins, said, she's being railroaded. Bridget Sullivan, prosecution for a witness for the prosecution. Uncle John, suspects, witness for the prosecution. And they were named witnesses for the prosecution early on, within days after the murders. So when they became witnesses of the prosecution, they were not asked tough questions. They weren't asked to defend themselves because Lizzie was on trial. And they teamed up, and now it is said that Lizzie and Emma paid Attorney Robinson $25,000 to represent her. And in today's dollars, in 2026 dollars, that would be somewhere between $800,000 and $850,000. So that's a sizable fee. He went and hired a helper, an attorney by the name of Melvin O. Adams. What's the O stand for? Ohio.
Oh, really?
Yes, Melvin Ohio Adams. And we probably not heard that name, and maybe a lot of our people who are watching the podcast have not heard that name. And he was a young guy, but he did a lot of legwork. He did a lot of digging. He did a lot of questioning people, especially in the early trial, in the early preliminary things that went on in the affidavit. He interviewed witnesses and things like that. And he was young, and he went places after that. He was appointed by Teddy Roosevelt, President Teddy Roosevelt, to be the federal prosecutor for the Boston area. And this would be a little bit later on in the early 1900s. So she had a dream team, like Karen Reed, like OJ, the best attorneys, and she needed it.
Yeah.
As did Karen Reed, and as did OJ.
Yeah.
No matter what your feelings are on that crime, the attorneys he had him acquitted. and the attorneys for Lizzie Borden had her acquitted. Now, another one of the questions that was asked by Mr. Ackerman is, did they purposely select jury members that were, they called them rustics, but that were rural in nature? And the answer to that is absolutely. They didn't pick anybody from Fall River. They didn't want anybody from Fall River to judge Lizzie for whatever reason. The press, for one thing, because the press was relentless.
Business affairs with the father.
Right, all of those things. So let me give you, first of all of the jury members were men. Why? Because women were not allowed to be jury members. That's just the law, not just in Massachusetts. It was the law of the whole country. And then over time, starting out west, remarkably enough, Colorado, Wyoming, places like that, where women started to get the vote, and then women were allowed to be on juries. But in 1892, only men. So let me tell you what where these people came from and who they were. And these are all men, 12 of them. George Clapp, he was from Somerset. Somerset's a little small town, not too far away from Fall River. He became the foreman of the jury. Frank Draper, he was from Taunton. William Churchill from Rehoboth. Charles Hicks from Swansea. Albert Peck from Dartmouth. Edward Hathaway from Westport. James McLaughlin from Taunton. Henry Tripp from Fairhaven. Notice how I said that, Fairhaven, not Fairhaven. Charles Vinell from Norton. George Brown from Mansfield, and William Cornell from Attleboro. So many of these guys were from smaller towns. Taunton was a larger city, but quite a distance away from Fall River. Not one juror was from Fall River. And they were simply dismissed as a jury was being brought in and they were to ask questions. You could kick as many off as you wanted. You could say, no, I don't. If for no reason, you didn't have to have a reason to say, no, I don't want him on the jury. And one of the things was that they did not want men from Fall River because of the association, not necessarily with Lizzie, but with Mr. Borden. Somebody had an axe to grind because they said he was a difficult
businessman, whatever,
Yes,
didn't
yeah.
like the companies he ran.
So when they brought these people in and they did a voyeur, and we've heard voyeur, V-O-I-R-D-I-R-E, voyeur. They did this during the Karen Reed trial. Some of the questions that they asked these potential jurors was, have you read accounts of the case in the newspapers? Have you formed or expressed an opinion to the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Would that opinion influence your verdict if sworn as a juror? And if any of them said yes to those, they said, well, dismissed, because the prosecution and the defense had the option of dismissing any potential juror. Can you convict upon circumstantial evidence alone? That was a question that was asked. And if they said yes to that, then they were dismissed. This whole case was all circumstantial evidence. There was no witness. There was no weapon. There was nothing that they could pin it on Lizzie. There was no blood on her. And so it was purely circumstantial. And they asked that question. Could you find someone guilty on circumstantial evidence? And if they said yes, then they dismissed them. Would the fact that the defendant is a woman affect your judgment in one direction or the other? Would you require clearer proof than if the accused were a man. And they the defense preferred men that were uneasy about judging a woman, and they expressed moral reluctance to convict without direct proof. And that's why they picked the jurors that they did. Question, are you a resident of Fall River? Well, they didn't want people from Fall River. Have you talked with anybody from Fall River about this case? Can you give the defendant the full benefit of the presumption of innocence? This is the questions that were asked of the potential jurors. And it mattered. It really mattered. And so this is one of the first cases that had been noted that the selection of the jury was engineered. Engineered by both Attorney George Robinson, former governor, and by Attorney Adams, who became an expert on jury selection. And I think you saw this in the Karen Reed case, in both trials, that the jury selection was engineered by both the prosecution and the defense.
Yeah.
By the defense to help the defendant, and it sure was here. So as I mentioned, the $25,000 that Attorney Robinson received would be between $800,000 and $850,000 today. Real big dough. There were in the trial. I looked this up and tried to get an indication online of how many witnesses there were, and it said there were not that many witnesses. And in my book, I numbered the witnesses for the defense and for the prosecution. And the defense witnesses, there were 30. And the witnesses for the prosecution, there were 51. So there were 81 witnesses. This is not including recalled witnesses. This is just called the number of witnesses that testified at the Lizzie Borden trial. So you had George Robinson, former governor of Massachusetts. He was the lead defense attorney. You had Andrew Jennings, who was Lizzie Borden's father's personal attorney. And then you had Melvin, Ohio Adams. And he was an associate attorney, but he did a lot of the work in the examination of evidence and bringing people into the court, jurors and jury selection, and he became later on a really high-powered an attorney. So Mr. Robinson, Attorney Robinson, left after she was acquitted. Uncle John left after Lizzie was acquitted.
Yeah, he dipped out.
He went downstairs to collect his witness fee, and back then they paid you on mileage. And they said, how far did you travel to get here? He said, well, I came from Iowa. And they said, well, yeah, but you've been living over in New Bedford area, right near the courthouse in Westport. You've been back from Iowa for 3 years. He said, yeah, but I originally came back from Iowa. He said, well, I'm not going to pay you travel time from Iowa to here.
That's crazy. Oh, my God. So he was just trying to gyp the system.
So he went back to Iowa. There's rumor that he came back to Boston several times, and possibly New York. But he never came back to Fall River.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
He never retained any type of correspondence with Lizzie. He didn't have much correspondence with Lizzie before the crime. He did occasionally write back and forth between Emma and he. But you got to realize, Emma was almost 10 years older than Lizzie.
Mm.
So Emma remembered Uncle John. And Lizzie didn't until he came back to Fall River about 3 years before the murders and took up residence in Westport, worked for the Davis Meat Market in Fall River, and guess what he did for work?
Butcher.
He was a butcher.
Yep.
And that's, as you can see in those skulls that are in that photo set, that those people were butchered. Just as if similar to what an animal would be butchered. Blow to the head,
Yep.
and
What happened to the skulls?
the skulls were returned, supposedly returned, and my understanding is that plastic copies were made of those and are on display at the Fall River Historical Society, not at the Lizzie Borden house, but at the Fall River Historical Society, which is on Rock Street, and they have a lot of artifacts of the Lizzie Borden case. And it's
So were they buried with the bodies?
they were buried later at the grave site. I don't think they were buried with the bodies. It's rumored that they were put in boxes and buried near the
Oh, okay.
caskets.
Separate graves.
Yeah, they
Okay.
didn't intern the two bodies, the two headless bodies, and then return the skull to the coffin casket of the deceased. They were just buried at the grave site.
Wow. So that's sort of the evidence around.
Yeah, and Lizzie and Emma died within 9 days of each other, one in New Hampshire. Lizzie passed away first in June, early June of 1927. And yes, it's 1927. It was about a week after Lindbergh flew the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And another case that we've been talking about recently.
Yep. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We got some Lindbergh stuff coming up. We've got Zodiac is in the calendar for everybody who's been asking. We've got Evelyn Dick. We got 2 episodes on Evelyn Dick with a special guest coming on pretty soon,
Right, we have...
which is confirmed. So we have Sarah Farr
Right,
coming on.
we have...
I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
And we have the Missy Bevers coming
Yes.
up in another 2 weeks
Yeah.
with the psychologist Adam Curtis is going to be weighing in on what his observations are of the surveillance footage, which actually shows the potential killer of Missy Bevers. And that's coming up on 10-year anniversary. And if you look at the video, and we'll show that video because it's available, you're going to look and you're going to say, gee, they're going to be able to find out who that person is because that person looks unique. That person walks unique. That person is, it's just...
Yeah.
But they've never been able to figure out who that person is in the photograph. They haven't even been able to determine whether the person was male or female.
I've seen some pretty interesting stuff in my research, other YouTube channels, but I will share that when we get to the episode.
Right.
I've got my own conclusion. I think Rich has his own conclusion, and I'm excited to hear what Adam has to say about it. But give it a couple of weeks, guys, and that'll be out probably about a week for us or so, and we'll be filming that episode, so that'll be pretty good.
And we've been talking about some other things, and what we decide on what cases to cover come from you. And we need our subscribers and our commenters to keep those cards and letters coming, keep those clues coming in. And we just reached a milestone this week. We've reached the 14,000 subscriber level.
Awesome. So thank you to everybody who's
Yes.
new to the channel. Stay tuned to episodes every single Sunday.
So we'll be talking on Sunday nights for a coffee hour.
Yep, every Sunday night I usually go live at 7 o'clock for a coffee hour. Come and hang out with me. If you guys have open, it's an open Q&A. Ask me anything. I'm usually on for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
So that's it's been an interesting time. We're approaching the magic month of May, and you know what you promised on that.
May 1st, guys, if the channel hits 20,000 subscribers, I will go get a special Lizzie Borden tattoo on my arm. So it's up to you guys, 20,000 subscribers, and I'll live stream the event as well. So you guys can tune in, watch the live stream of
Watch
me
the
getting
pain.
inked up for 4 hours or however long it'll take. It feels like forever in those chairs, I swear to God. But yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. This has been an interesting. Hope we've filled in a lot of those gaps and a lot of those questions that you've been asking about Lizzie Borden, and hope to make that whole picture clear. If you've got any more questions about this case or others, please put them in the comments, and we will try to get things sorted out.
All of Rich Little's books will be linked in the description below. You can purchase Cold Case to Case Closed if you haven't already. If you're new to the channel, this is a book by Rich Little on the perspective of Lizzie with two different authors, one in the perspective of Lizzie and one as a case evaluation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we've gone through every witness in the trial and what their testimony was and what their testimony meant to the trial. Tried to weave a story about how the prosecution and the defense tried to either exonerate Lizzie Borden or to condemn Lizzie Borden. And at the front of the book, and this continues today, there is a statement at the front of the book that said, not guilty in court, but still guilty in the court of public opinion.
Exactly.
And that's what I wrote the book to try to dissuade that public opinion that Lizzie was just a normal person with a normal life up until August 4th of 1892. And after that, her life changed forever.
And if you guys have read the book, be sure to drop a comment down below and let us know what you guys thought about it. Pretty much everybody that's commented on the book through like the YouTube comment section or even reached out to us via email or social media has loved it. So it's been very popular. It has great reviews. You can purchase it on Amazon. And if you'd like a inscribed copy to yourself or to a loved one, friend or family who's interested in the case or who just happens to be named Elizabeth or Elizabeth Borden, you can purchase an inscribed copy on eBay. And there's a little personalized tab down the bottom. And Rich will make that out to you.
I sure will.
For free of charge.
And I want to say hello, a big hello out there to Barnabas.
Yes.
And hope that everything is well in Rhode Island. And I also want to say a special hello to my new great-grandson, Jack.
There you go.
Jack, if you're watching, have a good day, Jack.
Alrighty, guys. I think that's going to wrap up this episode. Yeah?
Yes, I think so.
Alrighty, guys. This has been the podcast. Like, share, and subscribe. New episodes every single Sunday evening. Live coffee hours at 7 o'clock every single Sunday night. And with that, we'll see you guys later.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.